efficiently manage the power to the cities, build power plants, manage resources, and light up those cities like a Christmas tree. Well, almost. Do you want to learn how to play Power Grid?
In this video, we're going to take you through the full rules for the game, and if you stay tuned till the end, you can pick up some tips and strategies along the way. Coming up. Hi, it's Tarrant.
And Stella from Meeple University.
Now, let's get to the rules of Power Grid, game by Friedemann Friese, published by Rio Grande Games. Power Grid is an economic game for 2 to 6 players based on building up an electricity market. Through the game, players will bid against each other in auctions for bigger and better power plants, purchase fuel to power those power plants in a market which goes up or down in price depending on demand, and pay money to connect cities into their personal grids. The game ends once one player has connected a certain number of cities into their grid, and the player who is capable of powering the most cities with their power stations in that round wins the game. A number of the specific rules in the game of Power Grid will vary depending on your player count. And there are 2 tables in the rulebook which are critical to making sure you play these elements correctly. This table can be found on the back page, and this one on page 7 of the rulebook. We'll refer to these regularly through the video. To set up, each player takes 22 houses in their player colour, takes a help card, and takes 50 electro, which is the currency used in the game. Lay the board out in the centre of the table. You can choose either the American or the German side of the board. They play the same way. We're using the American side because it sits horizontally and fits on the screen better. Each player places one house at 0 on the city scoring track and another in a random order on the turn order track. This will be the starting turn order for the first auction. The map is split into 6 regions of 7 cities each, and the number of regions you'll use depends on your player count. You'll use 1 region per player or 3 in a 2-player game. If you want, you can use non-player coloured houses to block out the regions you're not using. Make sure the regions that remain are contiguous. For example, do not block out these 2 in a 4-player game. Next, you'll fill up the market down in the bottom left corner of the board. You should completely fill the market with brown coal cubes. Fill the spaces numbered between 3 and 8 with black oil barrels. Fill the spaces numbered 7 and 8 with yellow garbage tokens. And finally, place a red uranium token on the spaces labelled 14 and 16. The rest of the resource tokens are placed near the board, and all tokens are used at all player counts. Next, set up the power plant deck. Search through the deck to find these 10 cards. The power plants numbered between 3 and 10, the plant labelled 13, and the Step 3 card. Shuffle the rest of the deck. Then, depending on your player count, you may remove some of these cards from the game. Then place the Step 3 card on the bottom of the deck, and place the 13 power plant on top. The remaining plants are laid out exactly like this, in a 4x2 grid in ascending numerical order. You're now ready to play. Power Grid is played in a series of rounds, and each round is played in 5 steps. First, you will determine the new turn order. Then, players will have the chance to buy power plants at an auction. Then players will buy raw materials, the fuel to power those power plants. Then players can build new houses onto the map. And then finally, players will go through bureaucracy. This is where you earn money for the power you generate and then set up for the next round. Rounds are played through these same 5 steps throughout the game, but the game is split into 3 different steps or phases. Progression from one step to the next will be triggered by certain events during the game, and this will give some slight changes to the rules which shift the markets or shift how many cities are open to be built in. The game will begin in step 1. The game will continue in this way until the end of the game has been triggered, which will occur when a player has built at least as many houses on the board as the number listed in this table. You'll finish that round, and then the player who can power the most cities at the end of that round wins the game. So now let's go through each of the phases in a round. The first step of each round is to determine the new turn order, which is tracked on this track in the top left of the board. Now this will become clearer once we've gone through some of the other rules. But turn order is based on who has the most houses built in cities on the board, ranked from highest to lowest, and you'll track this on this track on the top right of the board. Where there's a tie, the tied players compare the power stations they've built, and whichever player has the single highest numbered station goes first in turn order. Set the new turn order on the track in the top left. For the rest of the round, some of the phases will be run forward in turn order and others will be run backward. And you will find that this turn order is somewhat of a catch-up mechanism during the game. The second phase of each round is to auction power plants, and this phase will occur forwards in turn order. At any given time during the first 2 steps of the game, there will be a market of 8 power plants on the board. These will always be arranged from the lowest number to the highest number. When the time comes to start an auction, only the 4 power plants in the top row of this market are available for sale. The plants in the bottom row are known as the future market, and those may only become available later on. When it is a player's turn in the auction phase, the player has 2 options. Either to choose a power plant from the top half of the market and put it up for auction, or to pass. When a player chooses a power plant to put up for auction, that player must then make an opening bid on that power plant. The opening bid must be at least as high as the number printed on the power plant. Then players may make bids on this power plant going clockwise around the table, rather than looking at the turn order. When it is a player's turn to bid, the player may either make a higher bid in cash or may drop out of that auction. Once only one player remains in the auction, that player pays their bid to the bank and then takes the power plant. The next power plant is then drawn from the top of the deck and the market is reshuffled so that it is once again in ascending order. Then, if the player who started that auction was the winner of the auction, play passes to the next player in turn order. Otherwise, play remains with the same player. The process then repeats, and whosever turn it is, either chooses a power plant to put up for auction or passes. If a player passes instead of putting a power plant up for auction, then that player is out of this phase of the round. The player may not buy a power plant or participate in any auctions for the rest of this round. Additionally, players are only allowed to buy 1 power plant per round. So, once a player has done so, that player also is not allowed to participate in auctions, buy another power plant, or take a turn for the rest of that phase of the round. The phase ends once all players have bought a power plant or chosen to pass. And you will note that this means the last player to buy a power plant in a given round will have no competition in the auction and can pay the minimum price. If nobody chose to purchase a power plant during the round, then remove the lowest numbered power plant from the market from the game. Refill the market as normal. A couple of other specifics on purchasing power plants. A player may own no more than 3 power plants at a time, or 4 in a 2-player game. To buy a new power plant when capacity is full requires one of your existing plants to be discarded. If you'd already put any resources on the plant you discarded, and we'll talk about that later, then you can redeploy them to your new or existing plants if it's the right sort of plant. Finally, do note that in the first round of the game, it is mandatory for all players to buy exactly 1 power plant. Then you'll do a special once-off rearrangement of turn order based on descending number of the power plants that each player bought during that phase. The third phase in each round is to purchase fuels from the fuel market, and this phase occurs in reverse turn order. Players may buy as many resources from this market as they wish, and will start from the low cost end. To buy a token, pay the cost shown in the box that token is in. In this case, that barrel of oil would cost 3 electro. Each token purchased must then be placed onto a power plant which consumes that type of fuel. The maximum storage capacity for each power plant is equal to double the number of icons shown in the bottom left corner. So this could hold 4 oil, and this could hold 2 garbage. A player may purchase as many resources as desired before play passes to the next player. And so here, yellow could buy, at most, these additional 3 oil barrels and these 2 garbage cans for another 24 electro. Once finished, play passes to the next player in reverse turn order, who purchases from the slightly more depleted market at the new higher costs. Players may not purchase a certain resource type if there are none available in the market. The fourth phase of each round is to build houses onto the map. This phase once again occurs in reverse turn order. Each city on the board is broken into 3 sectors where a house could be built, labelled 10, 15 and 20. And pairs of cities are connected by these power grid infrastructure lines, each showing a number. To build a house, place a house on the lowest numbered sector on a city on the board, and then pay a cost equal to the number you covered, plus the number on any of these grid connecting lines required to get to another one of your houses. Here would be a cost of 10 plus 6 is 16 electro. For the first house you place in a game, you would only pay the 10. A player may build as many cities as they desire and can afford before play passes to the next player in reverse turn order. There are some important restrictions on building in the game. During step 1, that is from the start of the game until you move into step 2, each city may have no more than 1 house built in it. As such, the route building element of the game early on can be quite competitive, as players can block each other out from certain pathways. However, you can pay additional connection costs to build in a city not adjacent to one you already connect. For example, here Blue could build in St. Louis for 24 electro, paying 10 for the house and then 6 plus 8 to connect to Oklahoma City. Once the game has moved past step 1 and into step 2, 2 players may build in each city. For example, once step 2 had started, Purple could now build here at a total cost of 22 electro, 15 for the house and 7 for the connection. Similarly, once the game has progressed from step 2 to step 3, only then will a third player be allowed to build in each city. Do note, however, that a player is never allowed to have more than 1 house in the same city. Once a player has finished building houses, that player's marker should be advanced on this track to match the number of houses that player has on the map. After doing this, if there is still a power plant in the main market that has a number equal or lower than the number of cities you have on the board, then remove that from the game and replace it as usual. Once all players have had the chance to build, the round enters phase 5, Bureaucracy, which starts with powering up your power plants. Each power plant down the bottom shows the amount of resources that need to be consumed to power a certain number of houses. In the case of windmills, no resources are needed, they simply power some houses. Players then spend those resources, returning them to the supply, not to the market, in order to power the houses shown on the power plant. In this case, the yellow player would just have powered up to 7 houses. The player then gains money based on this table for the total number of houses powered. In this case, 7 houses would be worth 82 electro. A couple of key notes. The player must have built that many houses on the map in order to power them. In this case, if the player had built only 6 houses, then the player would have scored 73 electro instead of 82, despite spending enough fuel to power 7. Alternatively, players may elect not to power all of the houses in their networks. For example, in this case, where yellow had only 6 houses, that player could have elected to hold back those 3 oil, power only 5 houses, and earn 64 electro. The key restriction is that a single power plant may not be run more than once per round. Finally, do note that even if you power nothing, you'll gain 10 electro, and you'll also note that there is a diminishing return for each house as you progressively go through the game. But more on that later. Next, you'll refill the resource market for the next round. Refer to the table on the back of the rulebook and then add the corresponding number of resources depending on your player count and the step of the game. Resources are always added from most expensive to least expensive. Here, for a 5-player game in step 1, you would add 5 coal, 4 oil, 3 garbage, and 2 uranium. Finally, take the highest price power plant from the market and place it underneath the power plant's deck. Replace it from the top of the deck as usual. Power Grid is played in 3 steps, and this keeps the game progressing. Step 1 begins at the start of the game, and it ends once a player has built a certain number of houses on the board. This is 7 in most player counts, 6 at 6 players, and 10 at 2 players. Step 2 begins at the end of the building phase in which this happens. To commence Step 2, remove the lowest numbered power plant from the market, and replace it from the top of the deck as normal. In Step 2, you'll now be able to have 2 players built into each city. But remember that Step 2 doesn't begin until after the building phase in which it's triggered, and so you'll still only be able to build 1 player per city until the following round. Step 3 will be triggered when the Step 3 card is drawn from the deck. At this point, the cards remaining in the deck will be all the ones that you slid underneath the deck at the end of each round. If this is flipped up during the auction phase, treat it as the highest power plant, and then finish the current auction phase. Then, at the end of that auction phase, or if it's triggered at any other time, go through the following steps. First, remove the lowest numbered power plant and the Step 3 card from the game. Then, shuffle what's left of the draw stack, and rearrange the power plants into a new market of size 6. For the rest of the game, both the top and bottom rows will be available for auction. Additionally, during the bureaucracy phase of each round, instead of putting the highest numbered power plant on bottom of the deck, now you simply remove the lowest numbered power plant from the game. It's possible for the draw deck or even the market to run out before the end of the game. Additionally, 3 players will now be able to build in each city. The end of the game is triggered when 1 player builds a number of cities equal to this row in the table. This ranges between 14 and 21 depending on your player count. Then finish that building phase and then the game is over. Then players determine the total number of their cities that they can power with the power plants and resources that they presently have. Here, yellow has finished with 15 connected cities, but power plants that will power only 13 of them. Here, purple has connected 14 cities, but due to running out of coal, can only power 11 of them. While here, blue has both connected and has enough fuel to power 14 cities. The player who powers the most cities, in this case blue, wins the game. In the event of a tie, the tied player who has the most leftover money wins the game. If it's still tied, whoever has the most connected cities, powered or otherwise, breaks the tie. If still tied, victory is shared. Power Grid is to a large extent an economic game. Even though you will gain quite a lot of money through powering houses early on in the game, you'll be making a lot of transactions through the game, and so doing so inefficiently will cost you towards the end. You need to keep an eye on the power plants that other players are building. If you go in on technologies that very few other players are using, you're likely to be getting your resources cheaper. And conversely, if you're in on a sort of technology where the fuel is very expensive, now might be the time to buy a new plant and replace that old one. Power plants are relatively expensive. You don't want to be buying them every turn if you don't have to. And also be warned that the value you get for powering houses diminishes as you increase the number of houses. For example, powering your first house is worth 12 electro, powering your 15th is worth only 5. As such, keep an eye on what price you're buying your fuels for towards the end of the game. Sometimes it's simply not worth powering these higher houses and just hanging on to the resources for the final scoring. Finally, a lot of the games will end in that final tiebreaker, and so make sure you're careful with your money because that last couple of dollars you spent could be the difference between winning and losing. And that's how to play Power Grid. We hope that you enjoyed this video and we hope you enjoy playing.
If you enjoyed this video, please help us by hitting the like button, subscribe to us, you can also hit the Meeple in the corner to do so, and hit the bell icon so you'll be one of the first to know when we have new videos. You can also follow me on Instagram for my board games, photos and reviews.
And finally, if you have any questions, comments or feedback, please write them in the comment section below.
Until